So to begin, Alistair MacIntyre in God, Philosophy and Universities tells us that part of the gift of Christian faith is to enable us to identify accurately where the line between faith and reason is to be drawn. He goes on to tell his readers that this is something that can't be done from the standpoint of reason, but only from that of faith. He outlines a turn to Thomistic philosophy to guide us in this enterprise, but he acknowledges that the turn to Aquinas is an intellectually demanding one. There are no stock answers to complex questions, and what is required, he argues, is constructive engagement with secular thought. John Courtney Murray's book, We Hold These Truths, Catholic Reflections on the American Proposition, also deals with the challenges of constructive engagement with secular thought in the context of modern pluralistic society. Murray, an American Jesuit theologian and philosopher, explores the idea of a civic consensus, a consensus that he accepts did not exist in the 20th century America he inhabited. He argues that a civic consensus allows a people to acquire an identity and sense of purpose, and he notes the inability of American universities to create such a possibility. As he puts it, the American university long since bade a quiet goodbye to the whole notion of an American consensus, one that implied there are truths we hold in common and a natural law that makes known to all of us the structure of the moral universe. However, he argues that the ethical and political principles drawn from the natural law tradition provide the basis for such a consensus among Catholics. His perspective on the question of consensus is relevant to those addressing the idea of, as I am, of institutional mission within Catholic universities, not least because the members of staff and students at Catholic universities reflect the pluralism of contemporary culture. The statutes of our own university state, not unexpectedly, that our fidelity as a Catholic university is to be measured by our commitment to the principles of the Apostolic Constitution on Catholic Colleges and Universities, Ex Corde Ecclesia. But we must nonetheless recognise the diversity of beliefs on the campuses of Catholic universities in relation to religion and to the philosophical presuppositions of religion. Not all the staff and students of Catholic universities share or even appreciate the need for or the worth of a common language with which to address questions of mission, identity, purpose, and formation. Murray and MacIntyre are useful to us in that they draw attention to different aspects of the challenges we face in addressing these questions. The first of these challenges is that of engaging with those keen to explore how we might draw the line between faith and reason, and how the content of the curriculum or programs offered within the university might be influenced by the Catholic intellectual and moral tradition. Here, the question of the relationship between educational practices and formation arises. The second of the challenges I want to address is that of engaging with secular culture, so that we begin a dialogue or sustain current dialogue with those members of the university community who have no faith commitments at all. And here the question of the possibility of authentically and consistently implementing our mission arises. In addressing the first challenge, it's necessary to try to be clear about what we take the nature and purpose of university education to be in general, and what we take the nature and purpose of Catholic education to be in particular. Professor Margaret Gardner, AO, Vice-Chancellor of Monash University and Chair of Universities Australia, in an address to the National Press Club of Australia in February this year, stated that a great university education imparts not only foundational knowledge, but a set of skills for life. She referred to the skills necessary to being able to analyse, decipher, interpret. She mentioned logic, reasoning, curiosity, and creativity. And she argued that university education is crucial to the health of democracies and nations. Professor Gardner mentioned the views of Nobel laureate and Professor of Economics Joseph Stiglitz, who argued also in a speech last year to the National Press Club of Australia that the growth in the wealth of nations over the last 250 years was largely due to advances in two fields. Firstly, in science and technology, and secondly, in social organisation, by which he meant the rule of law and the development of, of democracies characterised by sophisticated systems of checks and balances. Stiglitz warned that such development requires systems of truth-telling, of ascertaining, of discovering what the truth is and verifying the truth. Gardner connected Stiglitz's points about the importance of truth-telling institutions in the independent media, in the judiciary and universities, with recent research indicating that Australians reported high levels of trust in university experts. It's one of those polls that compare levels of trust of doctors, lawyers, car salesmen. This emphasis on truth and the implication that universities must go beyond providing vocational or professional education reminded me of John Henry Newman's view that universities should teach universal knowledge, presenting the widest and most philosophical systems of intellectual education and focusing on the truth of their principles. Newman recommends a liberal education for what it can achieve in relation to the cultivation of the mind, the development of the intellect, the control over our own powers. However, as you will no doubt appreciate, Newman's focus on truth is nuanced, going beyond the discovery and verification of truth by rational means and any guarantee of the success of democracies. Rather, he holds the conviction that truth with a capital T is an ally of the Catholic University, and that knowledge and reason are sure ministers to faith. Universities aim at the cultivation and enlargement of the mind of the natural human being. But the distinctive feature of a Catholic university is its approach to truth and the relationship it takes to exist between philosophy and theology. Achieving the truth for Newman implies faith. Commentators on Newman, such as Frank Turner, point out that there is some tension in his understanding of the education of the natural human being by comparison with the Christian. The world of knowledge within the liberal arts pertains to the natural human being and that person's participation in society. The university must teach this knowledge, but the Catholic University understands such learning as appropriate only to life on earth and not to the ultimate good of a human soul in eternity. Consequently, the Catholic University is a place for teaching universal knowledge, and this must include theology, which Newman sees as a science of the sciences. Turner notes that Newman repeatedly oscillates between addressing issues that refer to the natural human being and issues that refer to the good of a student's soul. But Newman, while urging a maximally expansive view of the knowledge to be taught in a university, nonetheless warns that that knowledge must not displace in the human imagination the necessity for receiving religious truth from the Church. So we see tension here between conceptions of truth, between conceptions of persons as natural human beings or members of God's kingdom, and tension between reason and faith. McIntyre argues that despite this tension and disagreement, there is underlying agreement about a set of meaningful existential questions to be answered by the Catholic philosophical enterprise. As St. John Paul II sets them out in Fides et Ratio. Who am I? Where have I come from? And where am I going? Why is there evil? And what is there after this life? And there is also underlying agreement that relativism, positivism, and idealism fail to provide adequate, truthful answers to those questions. As MacIntyre puts it, the summons to participate in the Catholic philosophical enterprise is a summons to situate oneself in an ongoing set of conflicts that we inherited from an extended history which constitutes our tradition. So what I want to suggest is that we ensure in our universities, through induction processes, professional development, and staff discussions, that the staff of our universities have sufficient knowledge to be able to critically engage students in exploring our tradition, to be able to address conflicts, and to carry out their particular role in a way that supports, or at the very least does not undermine, the mission of the university. There is room here for debate and recognition of the value of academic freedom. And there is definite and undeniable tension between the idea of the Church's authority and the authority of revelation on the one hand, and the autonomy of philosophical thought on the other. MacIntyre argues that it is the philosopher's job to come to conclusions about the questions raised within the Catholic philosophical enterprise and to reflect on those conclusions. It's up to philosophers to determine how they respond to encyclicals such as Fides et Ratio. However, if they find their conclusions are incompatible with the faith and with the Catholic philosophical enterprise, and he notes that this enterprise is one that can be seriously at odds with the dominant culture of secularized modernity, then MacIntyre argues that it is up to those who exercise the teaching authority of the Church to point out the discrepancy. Equally, we would argue that it is a matter of integrity for philosophers that they engage with any tension that arises between their conclusions on an issue and the Church's teaching on that issue. These are complex issues, but they are ones that apply beyond schools of philosophy. It is surely a matter of personal and professional integrity for all staff teaching or providing support to students within a Catholic university to reflect on their own positions with regard to the Catholic philosophical enterprise, and where those positions differ from the Catholic faith and the Catholic philosophical enterprise, to explore that divide. Such exploration presumes coming to an understanding of the Church's teaching on particular issues. And I include here contentious issues such as attitudes towards abortion and voluntary euthanasia. Staff members have a responsibility to try to come to an understanding of why the Church holds the views that it holds, and to establish the precise nature of their own disagreement, rather than to avoid debate on these issues. At the same time, I would argue that the university has a responsibility to assist staff in undertaking this kind of exploration. If we ask staff to agree to support the mission of the university within their contract of employment, which we do, then we must act to ensure that they understand that mission and that we include in that exploration treatment of issues that are socially and politically contentious, those issues on which the Church is often at odds with contemporary secularized society. Staff members who find themselves at odds with the teaching of the Church or who disagree with the Church on particular issues have a responsibility to determine how they deal with that disagreement, especially if discussion of the issues on which they disagree with Church teaching arises within the context of their teaching or student engagement. Clearly, staff members in a variety of schools and departments at Notre Dame and other institutions deal with issues on which there are passionately opposing views within contemporary society. So how do we approach both the possibility and the reality that staff members disagree with Church teaching, given that we are committed to the uniqueness of our enterprise as a Catholic institution? How do staff members come to understand that uniqueness and how does it manifest in practice, notwithstanding the reality of disagreement on contentious issues? A set of beliefs and commitments ought to make a difference to the way in which we operate in the world. If we ask ourselves why we should practice the virtue of honesty or humility, it's because those virtues manifest in action that reflects particular commitments to the value of truth and to a recognition that each of us is one person among many, and that whatever talents we have are God-given. My view is that we should build on the multi-dimensional approach we adopt already in facing the two challenges I outlined initially. So we should act firstly to support the team of people already engaged in attempting to ensure that the Catholic philosophical enterprise is well understood within the broad university community, but especially well understood by members of the teaching staff, given that it's their particular responsibility for presenting the Church's tradition to students. We should address philosophical and conceptual issues, such as arise in the debate on the relationship between faith and reason, in a variety of contexts. Notre Dame's core curriculum and its graduate certificate degrees offered in the liberal arts and in Catholic thought, which focus on the integration of faith and reason. I'm not advertising, I don't mean to be advertising anyway, on the concepts of human person and the good life, provide three ways of introducing these ideas to students and perhaps to staff interested in study. However, we also need strategies to address philosophical and conceptual issues in less formal settings, so as to open dialogue within particular disciplinary curricula on these questions. We must appeal to and attract those staff members unlikely to enrol in a course of study, so as to reach a better understanding of the Catholic intellectual and moral tradition. It would be wise to engage with staff in as many ways as possible, through discussions at staff meetings, professional development sessions for particular discipline areas, as well as for the staff as a whole, and through chaplaincy activities. While we currently employ these strategies, we might fruitfully review what we are doing and discuss possible avenues for extending and integrating what we do, or better integrating what we do. The collaboration of philosophers, theologians, chaplaincy, and our most talented teachers is crucial to planning and implementation of activities in this regard. By way of example of how we might address a philosophical issue, I want to consider more closely the question of the relationship or line between faith and reason raised earlier. In approaching this issue, we need firstly to consider how the Catholic intellectual tradition approaches drawing that line, and then to consider how the content of the curriculum or programs offered within the university might be influenced by that tradition. And we must have our staff engaged in that discussion. This consideration will differ within different discipline areas, but staff must be sufficiently competent and confident to address the questions that arise in class and to encourage dialogue on those questions. Facilitating such dialogue requires particular knowledge, skills, and attitudes so that the Church's tradition can be brought to life. Being aware of and engaging with John Henry Newman's claim that while all belief in God requires faith, all disbelief in God also requires faith. Claims like that are likely to stimulate curiosity and discussion. As MacIntyre puts it, paraphrasing Newman, both believers and unbelievers alike must commit themselves in a way and to a degree that cannot be justified by rational argument or evidence. Considering how we understand reason and its relationship to other forms of knowledge would seem to be a basic and useful approach to this kind of discussion, and one that takes the idea of intellectual formation seriously. Rational argument and analysis is a form of activity that's often associated with a scientific view of the world, within which we abstract from experience and develop concepts that mediate that experience, contributing to our understanding of ourselves. We observe behaviour and make inferences about what is typical of human beings in particular settings. We form beliefs that reflect our understanding of ourselves as material beings. But rationality in the context of the scientific worldview can be seen to compete with a more practical rationality that takes account of the interaction between reason, imagination, and emotion in coming to an understanding of ourselves and of particular concepts, such as friendship, love, responsibility. At the same time, we also have an awareness of ourselves that transcends the limitations of our particularity as human beings. And engaging with phenomenologists who became Catholics, such as Edith Stein, allows us to explore the possibility of another kind of knowledge. That is, knowledge that emerges from reflective or contemplative prayer, and might suggest that intuition may be closely associated with belief in God. One specific conviction of mine in relation to this kind of exploration of philosophical issues is that we should use reason to explain in plain English to students and to staff members who find themselves at odds with our tradition that there are serious and rigorous philosophical defences of the transcendent dimensions of our experience, and that as a matter of integrity, our staff members in particular, and appropriate to their positions, should have some familiarity with that tradition and some capacity to interrogate the concept of reason. Finally, as well as addressing philosophical issues, we must provide time to address practical issues in a variety of contexts, and to support staff in dealing with contentious issues that may arise in the classroom in relation to curriculum content or to public and social debate. Without training to assist staff in engaging with contemporary secular views, whether these are in conflict or in harmony with the teaching of the Church, staff may not be sufficiently prepared to facilitate critical discussion. And this might apply particularly to staff members who themselves have no faith commitments. Without such discussion in the classroom and in the broader community, the possibility of authentically and consistently implementing our mission is likely to be undermined. In taking the multi-dimensional approach I'm suggesting, our focus must be on engagement, so as to respond to the formation needs of our community. This could involve engagement with other Catholic organisations or colleagues. For example, we could perhaps benefit from reference to the approach that Catholic Healthcare Australia takes to strengthening their identity and mission. Our approach should entail engaging with existing staff members and asking them about their own formation needs, as well as about strategies that they think might be adopted with students and colleagues. We should be networking and engaging with groups of staff whose areas of work and expertise overlap, engaging within the broader, wider community as well, and finally, perhaps, using online engagement strategies that might appeal to individual students and staff members. The concluding section of my presentation turns to consider very practical steps that Catholic universities might take in regard to authentically implementing their mission and contributing to the formation of their communities. And I'm providing a list in no particular order. The first item recommends encouraging an attitude of self-reflexivity and the development of self-awareness in policymakers, administrators, and other staff members via particular professional development strategies. The aim is to stimulate consideration of how well we respond to and manifest the principles of Catholic social teaching in our lives, and particularly how well we do this in the face of conflict or when we're under pressure. It also suggests consideration of whether we are genuinely present to those with whom we deal when we're engaged in administrative tasks, recognising, of course, that we're all works in progress. The second item draws attention to the importance of collaboration between philosophers, theologians, and chaplaincy in presenting offerings to students. To some extent, we need to take an integrated approach to formation and professional development initiatives so that we, at the very least, understand each other's approaches and can reinforce one another's efforts rather than perhaps inadvertently undermining one another. The third item recommends that induction processes be reviewed and included among the suite of integrated strategies designed to enhance formation, and that employment selection processes be used to draw more attention to the university's concerns with formation and with ensuring the authenticity of its mission as a Catholic university. The fourth and final item recommends finding and building on what consensus we can establish, rather than unnecessarily and gratuitously emphasising differences. Alienating others, especially those members of our own university community who disagree with particular teachings of the Church, is unlikely to be productive in overcoming the challenges we face. Consequently, I recommend making use of existing avenues and programs in which the principles of Catholic intellectual and moral tradition are implicit, if not explicit, and emphasising those. Existing examples include service learning programs and applied ethics programs, such as the Giving Voice to Values curriculum and the Ethics by the Bedside program being developed at St Vincent's Healthcare Australia in collaboration with Notre Dame's Institute for Ethics and Society. These programs begin with an explicit consensus about the nature and value of the enterprise in which they are engaged and the principles and values that guide those enterprises. They contain strategies aimed at developing the dispositions, habits of mind and practice, that is, the virtues, that make it possible to act to implement the goals of those programs. They are consistent with the social doctrine of the Church. For example, service learning programs and the Giving Voice to Values curriculum both have at their heart the principle and issue of the common good, the intention to be of service to others, the recognition that the human person cannot find fulfillment in himself, that is, apart from the fact that he exists with others and for others, and that no one is exempt from cooperating in attaining and developing the common good according to his or her capacities. The Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church invites us to develop responses inspired by moral values that permit people to bring about a world of solidarity and fairness, to be resourceful in promoting the well-being of all men and all peoples, and to prevent their exclusion and exploitation. And I'm suggesting that these examples of programs, and I'm sure there are many others, could be used in precisely that way. There isn't sufficient time this evening to be more explicit in explaining precisely how these programs could be presented to students and staff, so as to emphasise the way in which they contribute to the mission of a Catholic university and hence to the development of its sense of identity and purpose. My point is that this can be done, and that it is best done via a suite or network of different activities, some of which I have already addressed. University administrators will no doubt notice that the implementation of what I'm suggesting will take quite some effort and time at the very least, and probably also some resources. But the integrity of the Catholic University's enterprise is dependent on engaging and grappling with concerns about the authenticity of our mission and the relationship between educational practices and formation. And that's it. So thank you for your attention.